everybody. Welcome to the show. It's July 3rd, 2026. And so we're going to start out by talking about what Jack Smith had to say yesterday on Nicole Wallace. This interview, by the way, if you guys did not watch it, it is worth the hour of your time. Yes, Jack Smith sat with Nicole Wallace for a full hour. It was an extraordinary interview. One of the things that I will just say, I walked away from it feeling better about some things, about the state of the Department of Justice, about the prospect of what comes after this. And particularly, at the effort and the strategy that went into everything that Jack Smith did in investigating Donald Trump. He wasn't able to talk about the second volume of his report because, as he said, he was very worried about running afoul of Judge Eileen Cannon and her order that the second volume couldn't be disclosed. And I understand that, he's not looking for any reason to be persecuted, but he did say that he would not be intimidated by what the Trump administration was threatening against him. And he talked through, to quite an extent, what the inside of the DOJ and the FBI looks like right now, because he, of course, had a huge amount of experience inside both. And one of the things that I think was the most significant about this interview is his confirmation that there are still a lot of good people inside the DOJ and the FBI who are trying to do the right thing right now by the rule of law. Nicole really poked at him about the current state of affairs. And, the top line thing that has gotten everybody's attention is him talking about the precarity of where we are as a nation. But the bigger arc of what he had to say was much more about what it's going to take to rebuild and what remains. And I have to say that, having not ever heard from Jack Smith beyond like one press conference that he did while he was investigating Donald Trump, you can't walk away from this interview without realizing that this is an incredibly skilled, articulate, strong advocate for justice, really impartial. And I have to say, having worked with lawyers who are like ex-DOJ people, I have a neighbor right now who quit the DOJ last November. Even from my earliest days as a lawyer, I was trained by people who worked in the DOJ or had left the DOJ. And so I've known a lot of people who have been through that circuit myself. Really hearing from him about the commitment of the people who are still there, who obviously won't be there if they're asked to do something unethical, won't be there if they have been asked to do something that violates the law. But that there are a lot of good people, lifers inside the DOJ still in the background who are, really doing their best. And, Jack Smith still has hope, which gives me some hope. I think he'd make a great attorney general. I will say that to the extent that you watch the whole interview, you really just have an overwhelming sense of competence from this man. And he also talked, and I had not known this before, about the quality of the people who had been on the team investigating Donald Trump, that many of them were award winners. Many of them were lifers who had, were really considered to be the pinnacle of the FBI and the DOJ. And the fact that, he insisted that, of course, the work was completely nonpartisan, but also that there was a really deep focus on the facts and not allowing any outside influences to impact their determination. So just a really extraordinary interview. I wonder, after 2028, assuming that we take back the White House, if he'll be in contention for the attorney general position. I think he'd be great at it, frankly. So really encourage people to go watch that if you happen to miss it. Just a lot of really good insights. And I think that you all will probably leave feeling a bit better as well. So worth the time this weekend. All right. We had a lot of questions this morning on the Patreon feed about Trump's state. And, one of the things that I have to keep telling you guys is that, he is in obvious decline. It's really funny. Yesterday on Blue Sky, somebody pulled together a montage from the last 10 years of Trump talking about corruption. And all of this comes in light of the recent disclosure by the New York Times yesterday that Trump's net worth has increased by $2 billion since he took back the White House. Also that he has been engaged in basically constant trading of stocks and also of crypto, and that his meme coin made him millions and also made Melania millions. You know, I mean, they're just staggering levels of corruption. But somebody put together a montage of all the times that he accused his opponents of being corrupt and the things that he had accused them of doing, which are all exactly the same things that he has done, right? But one of the things that you notice when you look at that is that 10 years ago, he was a much more articulate, not that he was ever hugely articulate, but much more articulate compared to now, logical, you know, able to form full sentences than he is today. It's a really noticeable contrast. So one of the things that I was asked today, and I kind of don't know exactly where this question was coming from, but those of you who've been with me for like the last, I don't know, coming up on 10 years now, know that we talked about the fact that because of the trajectory of a narcissist decline, things will always get worse before they get better. And often they don't get better until the narcissist is like removed from their narcissistic supply. So somebody said, well, like with all of his kind of like rampant decline and all the horrible things that are happening, it has to get better, right? Well, that's up to us. You know, like I hate to tell you guys this, but part of the conclusion here is that, you know, we all have a responsibility to save and preserve democracy. That's the thing that's going to make it better. Like Donald Trump's not going to get better, right? But we do see some really significant breaking points at this moment. You know, I know that we're in the middle of this huge heat wave here on the East Coast. It was 107 degrees here yesterday. More on that in a minute. But, you know, nobody's been showing up to Trump's state fair on the mall. Like literally, I was just following the footage of it. It opened, I don't know, like, you know, an hour ago. There's nobody there yet. It's insane how little traffic it's getting, how few people want to participate in this shit show. And also, you know, the other thing I will just say here is that we are seeing much more criticism of Trump from folks who we would have perceived historically to have been on his side. So, you know, yesterday, for instance, an Air Force, I think he's a colonel, was arrested on the steps of the Capitol building for protesting Trump, and particularly for calling out his unethical behavior and the corruption and all that other sort of stuff. White guys in the Air Force are not ordinarily what we would perceive to be as resistors. And there continue to be other signs of things shifting in very dramatic ways. Like Abdul El-Sayed, who is running in Michigan for the U.S. Senate. Gosh, do I like this guy. In the last few days, he's had some very big media hits. This morning, he was on Morning Joe. And I got to tell you, like, his messaging is so dead on that right now he's trending up by at least 5 points against anybody else in the primary. They have another month until their primary in Michigan. But he is just an extraordinary candidate. Like, I really do understand why he's running ahead of everybody else in that race. But I will just tell you that he made some comments this morning on Morning Joe, which reflect a state of affairs that are very similar to what we saw when Mamdani was running for mayor in New York City. Abdul El-Sayed was asked about what he's hearing. I mean, he was asked a lot of other questions because, God forbid, you know, like white journalists. I would like to see white journalists get through an interview with someone who is Muslim or of Arab descent without asking them about whether or not they think Israel has a right to exist. I mean, give me a fucking break, right? I'm so tired of that question. Israel exists, right? Like, it's just, you know, it's crazy how like there is this subtle Islamophobia in all of those interviews, right? But Abdul El-Sayed, one of the things that's really, really good about him in the context of the things that he says in interviews is that he always reverts back to the messaging of what Democrats can do, what progressives can do. And one of the things that he said this morning, to get back to my original point about the way the landscape is shifting, is that every single room that he is in right now in Michigan, people are coming up to him and saying, I voted for Trump before, but now I'm voting for you. And that has to do with the fact that progressive candidates, DSA candidates are now breaking through on messaging in ways that we haven't seen before. And also there is this enormous sense of betrayal that is growing and growing and growing in Trump's original base. One of the things that El-Sayed said this morning, which I thought was really interesting, was that, in Michigan, he's dealing with a lot of potential constituents who really want their tax dollars to go back into Michigan. They don't want them going into wars, bombing Venezuela, invading Iran, like bombing Iran. They don't want their money going into the pockets of people who are already super rich. And that was the thing that they thought they were getting, these Trump voters thought they were getting when they voted for him, which now they are recognizing they did not get at all, right? They have not gotten, we're going to make your life better. They've gotten the exact opposite, actually. And so one of the things that I think we're seeing, both in the poll numbers, but also in like actual verifiable evidence, like what's happening on the mall right now, is that there are people very, very fed up with the way in which they were bamboozled by Trump. And I do think that's going to grow. So if you're looking for a silver lining, to go back to the original question of like, are things going to get better? I think things are getting better, right? From the standpoint of what we're seeing in terms of elections. I'll just remind you, it was only last week that we saw a DSA candidate get elected in Colorado, like win the primary in Colorado. And now we have a DSA candidate running for the governorship of Wisconsin. We're seeing progressive left and DSA candidates breaking through in other areas of the country. And that is because of what they are actually promising that is really breaking through from the context of like, what can we do? This has led to, by the way, a couple of very funny moments on Fox News in the last couple of days. I don't know if you guys have been following this, but Fox News has been putting up graphics of what the DSA stands for. And it's things like 32-hour work week, housing for all, college for all, universal health care, God forbid, right? And I have these moments when I look at that and I'm like, even if you're a Trump person, you look at that platform and you're like, well, that actually sounds great. I'd really like to work 32 hours a week and have health care. I'd really like to be able to send my kids to college for free. So, one of the things that we have to realize here is that the DSA messaging, now that we're really getting like clear messaging, and at least in some places, and not this wishy-washy establishment centrist bullshit, is actually starting to really get through to even the people who have historically for the last 10 years been the fundamental base of the Republican Party. It's fascinating. And the reason why I mentioned Mamdani about this, and we've talked about this here before, is that Mamdani, interestingly enough, was actually able to sway a whole bunch of Trump voters inside New York City and Staten Island and other places in his election with exactly the same kind of messaging. So you want a silver lining, that's it. But we also have to get out and mobilize for the elections. Things are changing and it's really good. That part of it, I have a lot of hope about. Okay. There were a lot of people this morning on the feed who are asking me about the cherry blossoms in Washington, D.C. So I don't know why everybody is wrapped up in this particular issue right now. I'm just going to give you a little bit of background. Trump is trying to revamp the D.C. Golf course, and apparently was spotted with a map that did not include one of the historic runs of cherry blossoms as if they would be torn out. Now, here's one thing I want people to know. There is an ongoing court case about this golf course. And in fact, as recently as yesterday, there was a ruling from the judge that she needs to see more evidence of, first of all, the reason why this golf course needs to be revamped, but also what the exact plans for it are. Okay. I got to say one thing about this, though, because there are moments sometimes where like it's clear that there's a swarm on a particular issue on the Patreon feed some days. That's what happened this morning around this issue. And I got to tell you, I have a visceral reaction to this stuff sometimes where I was thinking about this as I was getting ready for the broadcast. My perception is that sometimes these kind of things are designed not as the distraction that we see on social media sometimes. Like everything's a distraction from the Epstein files, which is false. Okay, that's actually not true. Like the Epstein files can be a fiasco while other horrible things are happening in and of their own. Okay, but this feels like a distraction for white folks who would get really upset about some cherry blossom trees and not get upset, for instance, about the fact that here in New Jersey at Delaney Hall, which is one of the largest concentration camps on the East Coast, there's no air conditioning right now in 107 degrees. And there are elderly, pregnant, sick people inside that camp who literally can't breathe right now. I got to tell you, I'm a lot less worried about some trees in Washington, D.C., even with the historical nature of what's there, than I am about the lives of people less than 10 miles from my house who are currently suffocating inside a concentration camp, right? So, you know, one of the things that I have to say here is that I know that there's outrage and grief about what's happening in Washington, D.C. I know that people are very upset about the East Wing of the White House, and that people are very upset about the UFC having done a thing on the ellipse, right? Very upset about, like, you know, the prospect of an arch, and, you know, like, but those are objects, right? Like, and to me, like, it's fine if you want to be upset about both, but I got to tell you, I have a visceral reaction to people getting really upset about cherry blossom trees and not talking about people suffocating to death in concentration camps. I have a moment where I'm like, fucking trees can be replanted, right? Like, people who die cannot be replaced. And to me, you know, I need people to understand that one of the reasons why they are tearing down monuments, one of the reasons why they are making these threats to redesigning Washington, D.C., all of which can be fixed, is to create exactly this kind of pearl clutching around stuff while they get away with humanitarian violations, crimes against humanity, mass murder, right, in other places. And so I just want to, like, do a kind of, like, gut check on this, right? You know, I get that people can be upset about more than one thing at once. What bothers me is when you're more upset about the cherry blossom trees than you are about what's happening inside concentration camps. And the other thing I will tell you here, okay, is that as much damage as he is doing to Washington, D.C., as much as it bothers me as a former resident of Washington, D.C., for instance, that they're doing flyovers for 14 hours straight today, and they're going to launch as many fireworks, you know, like, I don't know, whatever it is, 1,800 times the fireworks that they normally do on the 4th of July. That's not very nice to the residents of D.C., right? Yeah, it sucks that they've torn down half the White House and, you know, buildings are being impacted. But I got to tell you, like, all that can be restored. And if you're going to focus on something right now, you want something to be outraged about right now, it should be about the fact that in the last week, ICE has kidnapped 10,000 people in this country. They have a new quota to arrest 2,000 people a day. They arrested a nun last week who was on her way to service and stole her rosary and wouldn't return it. And the only way that she was released from detention was by a plea to her congressperson. Like, that is where our attention needs to lie. That is where our outrage needs to lie, right? Like, there is a hierarchy here to suffering. And I am far more worried about the human lives that are being lost and ruined and destroyed and traumatized than I am about some cherry blossom trees. So some of you may not like that, but I'm going to tell you, I think that is a recentering that we desperately need right now. Because I've seen more people talking about cherry blossom trees this morning than I have seen about Delaney Hall. And that, to me, is, like, viscerally upsetting. Okay. I do want to direct you all, if you need some inspiration today, to the speech that Zohran Mamdani, speaking of Mamdani, just finished at the City Hall in New York City. He did, this is one for the history books, he did a speech about the great promise of America, surrounded, by the way, at the desk in Washington, in New York City, rather, the desk at City Hall, with an incredibly diverse group of folks from New York City, about the importance of always striving to be better, the importance of always striving toward the promise of America that is yet unfulfilled. The fact that we cannot forget that one of the foundational concepts of America, which it has never provided entirely, is freedom. And that the place that we are falling down right now is by failing to recognize, you know, it's a fascinating speech, that we are the wealthiest country on earth, where people go to bed every night hungry, where people die from curable illness because they can't afford health care, and where we, you know, like a certain, like, tiny fragment of the culture is celebrating trillionaires, while people are being kidnapped off our streets. And that our obligation as residents of this country, with all of that promise, is to remember what we're supposed to be and start working toward it, right? I really encourage you to go watch that speech. Trump's going to give an insane speech tonight. We all know that, right? He's going to repeat all the same shit that he said before. It's going to be 107 degrees in Washington, D.C. I don't know how long he's going to speak for. You know, he'll be completely incoherent. You'll be flooded with terrible clips of it. You can ignore all of that. But go watch Zohran Mamdani's speech from this morning, because that actually is a speech, a true, honorable, historic speech on the 250th anniversary of America that is worth everybody's time. So, you know, that is where I want to send you guys today for a little bit of inspo. All right. I will be back here this afternoon with a bonus broadcast for our Patreon subscribers. We already have some really great questions coming through on that front. Please join us over at patreon.com/ResistanceLive if you've not yet done so. For as little as $5 a month, get a bonus broadcast every week. You get to ask me questions for 3 hours before the broadcast and other perks, depending on the tier that you're in. Also, just a quick reminder, our day job at the Ripple Effect Institute is working with community organizers and nonprofit leaders and advocacy campaigns and people running for office who are really trying to create a legacy level of change in this incredibly challenging time. If you are interested in joining us over there, you can apply for a complimentary consulting call at the link that is below here in both the description box, and it'll be in the comments as soon as the broadcast is over. I do want to just say that however you choose to observe or not observe this particular holiday, please keep in mind and stay focused on the people who need our help the most, right? Marginalized people, people who are being kidnapped, people who are in detention, and do what you can to support those folks. There's plenty of ways to get involved. You can get trained in community defense by a rapid response network in your area. You can get involved in helping people who are afraid to leave the house. You can get involved in immigrant protection legislation in your state. There are all sorts of ways to get involved. And also, please do not forget trans kids and adults who have been, once again this week, really tortured by policies inside this country. Please make sure that you are, even though Pride Month is over, reaching out to those LGBTQ+ and trans and non-binary supporting organizations, making donations, volunteering, asking how you can help. Lots of love to all of you this holiday. I will see our Patreon subscribers at 3 p.m. Eastern this afternoon. And stay cool, everybody, if you're on the East Coast. All right, everyone. I'll see you soon. Bye. That's our show for today, folks. Thanks so much for being here at Resistance Live. To get more out of the show, including bonus broadcasts, the answers to all your most pressing political and legal questions, and way more, head on over to patreon.com/ResistanceLive and become a paid subscriber. And don't forget to hit subscribe here on your favorite podcasting platform to make sure that you never miss an episode. See you next time.